It has been a few months since the Wendigo incident, and my body still hasn't fully healed. However, one late Tuesday night my pager began to light up and vibrate along the cracked wooden table that sits in the middle of my kitchen. I slowly move towards the table and pick up my pager and slowly read the message that is being displayed on the brightly lit screen, but my pager only showed a small amount of numbers. These numbers are all us hunters need to know, as it corresponds with our new case on our secure network. Slowly, I grabbed my laptop that sat under my desk and booted up the old piece of crap that seemed like a relic from the 90s as it buzzed and spat slowly to life. While it loaded, I took a large swig of my alcoholic medicine, as the pain of that night a few months ago was still affecting my body and also my mind. When my mind began to drift off into the depths of my memories, a loud audible beep rang out and bounced around my living room, snapping me out of the depths, and I began to log into the system, as each case I am able to see will be shown to me. However, there was only one case file, and it was displayed with a bright red flashing urgent header, and normally that wouldn't faze me, but my handler found it so important to give me access to only one single case file. The case file that was shown to me was called Case Mourne. Usually, most case files only hold numbers and not names, so that piqued my interest instantly. Grabbing my laptop, I lifted it up and sat at the kitchen table, and also instantly sobered up once I opened the file and saw whom the requester was. Minister O'Donnell, leader of the Council of Mourne. Seeing an official request from a seated official was extremely rare, as they don't usually dirty their hands with such matters. Normally, requests come from a third party on request of an official's aid. This time, it's from the official directly. Getting up wasn't easy, as the damage to my body was still there. However, I pressed on and contacted my handler by the network, accepting the job and beginning to pack my bags, as the next stop was the great green land of Ireland. Travelling as a hunter has always been a hassle, as we cannot go by conventional means, as our weapons and items would be taken and we would be arrested and seen as terrorists. So, we have to cut a deal with the local military of our area of deployment to employ us as specialists, so we can enter the country and then assume the persona which is best suited for the contract we have forsaken. Once landed on Irish soil, I grabbed my gear and headed to the nearest safe house. Once there, I began to gather information as carefully as possible. Sitting down at the table in the dark and dingy safe house, I open the case file and begin to take out each photo and piece of paper and lay it out on the table in front of me. After a while of reading the file, I counted at least 4 victims to this day, and each of them was missing their heads. And to make it more weird, the wound was instantly cauterized when the head was severed from the body. That piece of information was extremely concerning, as cauterization of a wound would take heat that could easily scale over 400 degrees Celsius, and that is not an easy feat to do with even modern technology. So, after that piece of vital information, I came to the conclusion that I am now not dealing with a minor issue, but a major one. After grabbing one of my fake IDs and badges, I head out to the village of Mourne. While travelling to the village, it was like heading back in time. Not much in the way of cars and modern technology, but just enough to get by as it felt refreshing to go somewhere where the air is clean. After a long while on the coach, I reach the village centre and am greeted by the village single police officer, Sergeant Smith, a self-important, pompous dwarf of a man. He spoke slowly but sharply and asked, "Are you this specialist?" Sergeant Smith spoke with a stuck-up tone, and it seemed to rattle me the wrong way, but I shrugged it off and nodded, as my credentials show that I am a doctor from the United Kingdom who specialises in extreme wounds and suspicious deaths. Without speaking much to the officer, I made my way to the main village centre, and once entered the building, I made a beeline for the minister's office, but was blocked by an aide of the minister and was handed a file without much of a word and sent away. In this line of work, I am used to the cold shoulder from officials, but receiving a request from a minister and not being able to speak to him was concerning. Once receiving the file, though, I went to the local inn and rented a room. Rustic and spacious, a room that would cost a fortune in the city, but here it is a pleasant commodity that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Once seated in my room, I open the file and a memory stick and a small portion of papers fall out. These papers show the victims in order. Age 43, male, farmer. Age 44, female, housewife of farmer. 30, male, councilman. 20, male, college student. These people don't seem connected except for the farmer and his wife, and with that thought passed, I moved onto the memory stick, which had the crime scene images and a few photos of a horse galloping across the woodland trail. Looking through each image, my stomach bubbled from the gore-filled wounds on the bodies. However, each head was missing, and the wound on the stump was surprisingly and instantly cauterized. Shaking my head at the information I had next made to see where the crimes actually happened, and that is what shocked me. Each crime scene was in the same area, and that area was in the woodlands just outside of town near the old mill. That fool of an officer couldn't find his nuts in his pants, never mind a key location in investigation. That seemed supernatural in means. After grabbing something to eat and reapplying my ointment and bandages, I set out to the crime scene. Once approaching the main street of the village, I hear a loud and terror-filled scream. My attention was instantly captured, and without a second thought I began to run over in that direction. I arrived, and the smell of blood and burning flesh invaded my senses and caused me to stop in my tracks. Laying on the ground was a man around 30 years of age. Blood soaked the walls from multiple attack wounds with a sharp weapon. However, the worst part is that the corpse was missing its head once more. Looking down at the stump, you can actually see smouldering flesh and burnt blood vessels, indicating intense heat was applied at the moment of separation. Turning around, I look at the ground, but the scene was easily contaminated. However, in the mess of footprints, I could see a set of horseshoe tracks leading down the hill towards the old wooden mill. After speaking to some locals about the mill, they say it has been abandoned for some time, and they even see strange lights around the grounds at night. With that, I went back to my room and awaited nightfall. Once the sun had sank into the horizon, I grabbed my gear for the hunt and took a bit of everything, as most creatures don't like silver or blessed items. They're kind of universal in the hunting career path. Making my way towards the road to the old mill, I see what the residents spoke about as 3 strange lights move in a line towards the mill from the tree line to the east of the mill. These figures don't walk at a normal pace. It's slow and measured, like they are doing it for a reason. After watching the three orbs of light disappear into the abandoned mill, I wait a short while before moving closer and weave myself up the path, looking for any sort of surveillance systems like tripwires to pressure plates to even basic and primitive empty cans on a string, but found nothing of the sort. Once at the mill, I find a crack in the wooden structure that allowed me to see and hear what is going on in the inside. The light hit my eyes as a small burning fire was surrounded by offering pots with different liquids surrounding a stone tablet. This stone tablet had a young foreign woman and a bunch of hooded figures stood around it. The young foreign woman tried to speak, and I couldn't exactly understand her, but if I must have guessed, she was from Russia or maybe one of its provinces. The hooded figures around her began to tie her down tightly so she couldn't move and gag her once she was fully and completely subdued. All the poor woman could do was cry and struggle, but to no success. I began to think to myself that this is wrong, but before I could move, the hooded figure to her head pulled out a sharp knife and began to gut her like a fishmonger guts a fish. The hooded figure sliced the now dead woman sloppily and began to recite a chant while removing her heart, liver, and many other organs, while placing them in different offering bowls laid around the stone slab. Once the ordeal was over, I was able to look away. As soon as I did, a scream came from the village, and I began to run as fast as I could, knowing that something evil had been summoned. Once arriving in the village, the streets are totally abandoned. Not even a single soul was on the streets, even though a blood-curdling scream rang out only minutes before. Slowly scanning the village center for any signs of life, as I slowly moved closer and closer while holding my trusty revolver in my hand with the hammer locked back ready to unleash hell. Reaching the center of the village, I sigh, but as I begin to lower my guard, I hear a wail of a horse and the sound of hooves on the cobblestones that resonate from the south of the village. My eyes search the darkness of the area as I see a large silhouette shrouded in mist. Once my eyes locked with the silhouette of a rider, my heart began to pound in my chest like a herd of elephants that have been spooked. Without hesitation, I lift my revolver and fire 2 shots into the mass of the rider's chest. As the rounds hit, the rider falls from its steed and collapses to the ground in a heap of clothing. While I approach, as my instincts began screaming at me that the rider wasn't dead, and within 3 steps I took, the rider sits up, stands from the ground like nothing had happened, and turned to me, and that is when true fear kicked me in the chest like a bull at full fury. This rider wasn't dead, or human, as it was in fact headless. Frozen to the spot where I stand, with my eyes and heart filled with fear, as standing in front of me was the fabled Irish folk legend, the Dullahan, a fake creature of fairy variety that most hunters wouldn't even get involved with, as they are mercenaries of death. The Dullahan began to move towards me, starting at a slow pace, as I snapped out of the fear-induced trance, but within moments of me stepping back, the creature had closed the gap between us and had lifted a sword from its sheath to above its head, and as it holds it in the air, the blade explodes with a molten hue, as I now know how the corpses gain their wounds, and if I wasn't careful, I would be the next to perish to this horseman's cursed blade. All at once my training kicked in and I shifted backwards and to the side, making sure that the blade missed its target, but only by a few inches, and the heat of that cursed blade still seemed to give me a slight burn on the side of my face. Looking at the creature, I lift my revolver once more and empty the rest of my bullets into its chest. However, when I had emptied my revolver, the Dullahan just stood there, totally unaffected by my silver nitrate infused bullets, and just grabbed my throat and began to crush my windpipe with a single gloved hand. Slowly feeling the cold embrace of death, I struggle hard and place my foot on its chest and use all my remaining strength to prise myself from its deadly grip. Landing on the ground with a thud, I instantly grab my blade that I keep stashed in my boot and stab the Dullahan in the chest where its heart would be. The Dullahan just stands there and seems completely unaffected and punches me straight in the face, causing me to fall back down to the ground holding my face in pain, as my nose instantly breaks in at least 2 places. While I lay on the ground, trying to recover from the hit, the Dullahan grips me by the boot and with its supernatural strength throws me against the side of a van, leaving a large dent and knocking the wind completely out of me as I begin to feel one of my ribs crack. Huffing heavily, my vision begins to waver as the Dullahan looms over me as it reaches down and grips me by the throat once more and then slams me down on the bonnet of the van. As I fade in and out of consciousness, the horseman walks back and grips his sword and slowly walks back over to me while raising it above his head once more. Heroically, the sergeant, who only seemed to annoy me when I first met him, appeared out of the darkness and attempted to spear the Dullahan to the ground. However, his attempt was extremely in vain and fatally wrong. Once the sergeant connected, the Dullahan gripped the officer and face plants him into the floor, and without any effort, the Dullahan brings his foot down onto the officer's head, crushing his skull like a watermelon under great pressure. My vision corrects itself and notices what happened and becomes enraged as I stumble towards the horseman and slams my hand on the knife that is still stuck in its chest of the walking tank like Fae. Once my hand connected with the pommel of my blade, it begins to beep and I slink behind the van as once I'm hidden, the blade in his chest begins to release a small thermite explosion from the hilt, and that causes the Dullahan to be blasted across the road into the village fountain. Peeking over the bonnet of the van, I cough and begin to pick up what remains of my custom blade, as my metallic onyx blade is still intact. Once I retrieve the pieces, I am struck from behind with a blade strike, as surging pain from the cut and burn that the horseman is just inflicted on me. Stumbling forward, I look and notice not even a powerful thermite explosion could face this monster of a creature, and all I could do was approach the nearby church to try and gain some distance from it. Bursting through the doors of the small church, I crash to the ground as my body is beginning to show signs of intense fatigue and my body needing a lot of medical attention. Within moments of getting to my feet, the door exploded inwards from the hinges, and in the cloud of debris stands there the harbinger of death. My death. All I could do was stumble towards the altar, and when in touching distance of it, I feel my head being grabbed from behind and slammed repeatedly against the marble altar as my jaw begins to fracture as I reach out my hand and grab the only thing in distance, and that was a solid gold candlestick, and I began to strike at the arm of the Dullahan. To my surprise, it recoils in a sort of pain, or maybe it's afraid. Just my luck, as any more damage though, I think I would have been done for. Taking this opportunity, I stumble to my feet and repeatedly but sloppily strike the horseman. Without training, a normal hunter would have died from the wounds I gained, but I went through multiple body strengthening sessions with my grandfather, who trained me to be the hunter I am today. However, each strike that hit the Dullahan, it recoiled more, as it seemed to fear precious metals. Maybe it was the purity in them, and there was no corruption from carbon, maybe? After the fifth blow, the candlestick breaks and becomes a slight short spear, and with that change I rammed the golden spear into the chest of the Dullahan, causing it to become immobile. While the horseman became still as the grave, I took this opportunity to stumble out and towards the great mill, and burst through the door only to find the altar and no figures whom I saw before. Collapsing to the ground once more, I look back and see the shadow of the once immobile horseman standing there, slowly approaching me, but once it tried to cross the threshold of a mill, it stopped and could not enter. With this boon of luck, I slowly reached to my feet and grabbed the mill's only dough mallet, and repeatedly hit the stone tablet that the sacrifice was held on. As I came to the conclusion that, without an anchor to our world, the fairy, or fae, cannot remain in our world. This is because most fae tales of this place have a sort of anchor that keep the creature or monster in our world. Whack after whack, the Dullahan became more and more enraged, as the threshold barrier clung to him and kept him back. This is until he pulled his sword once more and lunged it forward, but as the final strike hit the tablet, causing it to shatter, then, once it had split in two, a wave of energy rushes from the tablet and engulfs the Dullahan, causing it to be pushed back. An inferno of energy spiraled around it, slowly banishing it from our world. However, before it vanished, the Dullahan only lifted its sword and dropped it to the ground. As it slowly dematerialized, the sword stabbed the floor, causing all around it to become engulfed in an holy flame. Slowly, I looked around and slammed the mallet on a patch of wood that wasn't yet engulfed in flames, and shattered the wood, narrowly escaping a blazing inferno that would have been my tomb. Once I got back to the village, I collapsed and passed out. Days later, I awoke in a clinic and I was completely covered in bandages. When I looked around, the minister was actually stood there at the side of my bed, and the only thing he said to me was, "Thank you." After those words left his mouth, he turned on his heels and walked away, never even looking back at me once. Turning my head to the side, I noticed a strange file on my bedside cabinet, and with that I stayed until I recovered enough to travel back to my home. And once back there, I got curious and opened the file, and to my horror, the figures had left me a note. It said, "Leave our affairs alone, or dying is the least of your worries." Signed, XL. With that note, I gave my handler a message instantly, and all I got was, "Wait for further orders." That seemed a little bit too cryptic to me, and with it ringing in my mind, I thought that something wasn't right, and in my gut, I knew the biggest hunt is yet to come. Hiya guys, this is Kindarous, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this. This one has been a while. Yeah, I've been working on this one for a while, and I just want to thank out everyone who's been patient with me. So please subscribe, like, share this video. YouTube will not show my channel probably. I'm too small. So yeah, please comment in the section below what creature you want the hunter to fight next. You guys can influence the story. As you see, this is the second part, so he has fought the legendary Dullahan. In the first part, he fought, well, the Wendigo. So, this is Kindarous signing off. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.